Hey, everybody, I just want to introduce to you this interview with Caroline Glick. We had an opportunity when we were in Israel to sit down with her for about an hour and pick her brain about politically what's going on in Israel. And if you don't know Caroline Glick, she is one of the most prolific political analysts you will ever encounter in Israel. She's great, and you're going to love her. I've did an interview with her before, and it was wonderful. And this one was even better, I believe. But as you probably are aware of, Caroline Glick now has moved from being a political analyst for Jewish News Syndicate, and now has moved into the Netanyahu administration. And she is involved pretty highly in the administration. She's involved in foreign affairs for the Netanyahu administration. So I saw a picture of her. She had accompanied Netanyahu to Washington. It was part of his council before they met with Donald Trump. So this interview with her will be insightful. It'll kind of tell you what's going on the ground there, not only in Israel, but around Israel and the countries surrounding Israel, and where things are going. So hope you enjoy this interview with Caroline Glick. Hey, everybody, we are here in Israel. This is our last day in country. We're going to be back in March, and we'll update you then. But got a chance to talk to the great one, Caroline Glick. We love you in the States for all the information you give, and you have such tremendous insight. And I would advise everybody, if you don't know Caroline Glick, you've got to tune in to her. She's phenomenal. Anyway, there's a lot of pressing issues us in the West are looking at, and the first thing we want to get your opinion about is the hostage deal. Right. We're happy that hostages are being released, but at what price? Right. It seems like Israel's paying a pretty high price for this. Can you bring some insight to our people watching this?
So we have to remember that when Israel embarked on this war after we were invaded on October 7th, the government set 3 goals for the war. Okay. The first one is to destroy Hamas as a military organization. Okay. The second one is to return the hostages. Right. The third one is to prevent Gaza from ever posing a threat to Israel in the future. Okay. So those are still the 3 goals of the war. Okay. And the hostage deal is a way of achieving the second. And there was a lot of fear in the IDF, particularly, that continued hostage rescue missions were going to cause them to be killed. This is particularly true after we had 6 hostages brutally executed in September, I believe it was, in the tunnels in Gaza, because they were afraid that the IDF was going to discover them. And so there was a sense in the general staff of the IDF, and also we had Arnon Zmora, the commander of the counterterrorism raid that saved 4 hostages last year, earlier last year. He was killed during the raid. So it's a question of how many soldiers are you willing to sacrifice to rescue the hostages, and what's the likelihood that you're going to be able to successfully rescue them, given that that Hamas has set it up so that anytime you come close to them, they'll be executed. So I think that in the end, what was determined was that the best way to secure the second goal of the war, which is to rescue the hostages, was to reach a deal. Okay. So long as I consider, and I think most sane people in this country, the price to be outrageous. Some of the terrorists that are being freed from jail, and we're talking about 2,000 terrorists for 33 hostages, only 25 of whom are considered alive. Wow. And that these are actually mass murders we remember, because they carried out some very horrific massacres in Israel against our people 20 years ago during the Palestinian terror war. So this is a tremendous price to pay, and also the redeployment of IDF forces out of most of the places that we control in Gaza through the sacrifice of our best soldiers. Yeah. We've lost 405 soldiers in Gaza during the land operation there. So that it's a steep price, but I think that you make a determination that one of the goals of the war is to get the hostages out, and you want to be able to get out as many alive as possible, and so you pay the price. But I think the deal that was agreed to is actually 3 separate deals.
Okay.
And so we're in the first deal right now, which is for 33 hostages. And the price that we're paying for them is steep. It's extremely high, exceedingly high. But I think you can still achieve goals 1 and 2, even having paid this price.
Okay.
But if we move to the second stage of the deal, which requires the IDF to remove all of its forces from Gaza, including from the border zone, not only between Gaza and Egypt, so that Hamas would retain control over the international border or restore its control over the international border, but that we would also remove our forces from the perimeter zone that we've established. So I think that would require, that would involve a strategic defeat that would be you wouldn't be able to come back from, and so it would sacrifice the first and arguably I think the most important goal of the war, which is to annihilate Hamas.
Right.
And the third, I think, is equally important to prevent any such a threat from ever receding along Israel's border with Gaza. So I think what the Prime Minister has said is, look, we have our bargaining position. Now, we demand that Hamas be destroyed in order to implement phase 2. Yeah. And if they agree to be destroyed, then we'll be able to reach phase 2, which is basically the second agreement. And to the extent that they're not willing to destroy themselves, then the ceasefire is over and we'll go back to business. And so I think that we have to look at it as, if you look at it as one deal that has 3 phases, then you fail to recognize that unless Hamas agrees to dissolve itself, which of course it won't, then there's really only one agreement and there's only one phase, and that's the agreement, and that's the agreement that we're implementing now. And again, the price is very high, but we do have the 3 goals, and this was an opportunity to achieve much of goal 2, and get all of the female hostages out. Okay. And that's very important as well. Sure. For specific reasons. And so I think that was the thinking behind it. Okay.
So you think stage 2 and 3 will be reached?
I don't see Hamas agreeing to Israel's terms, and I don't see Israel changing its terms. Yeah. So as a result, even this agreement that we're implementing now, it was an agreement that Hamas only agreed to after President Trump won the election. They had refused to accept the prospect of the war beginning again. They refused to accept that Israel would have its troops remaining in control over the international border between Gaza and Egypt. They refused to accept that there would be IDF forces deployed along the perimeter inside of Gaza from north to south and east to west. So I think that they made concessions for this deal because Trump was elected that they hadn't been willing to make under Biden. And that's what enabled us to do it, because again, we won't abandon the war goals. Right.
So we've been talking to a lot of Israelis, IDF soldiers. They're very concerned about letting these rapists, murderers, terrorists out of prison, and some of them are going to resettle in East Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and they're very concerned. How is the general population taking this? Is it just save the hostages at all cost? Or
well, I'd say that the population is divided according to what news they watch, because a lot of the media in Israel, most of the media organizations in Israel are very far to the left politically, and they have refused to have a rational debate about the hostages. They always do this. They did this in the past with hostages being held by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. Said everything that they do is emotional. They refuse to have any discussion of the strategic implications of any hostage deal, and they demoralize the public. And that's basically been the consistent policies in the newsrooms in every major Israeli newspaper, every television station, every radio station except for one TV station out of 4, one radio station out of, I don't know, maybe 10.
Wow.
And there are no daily newspapers that have shifted from the line that we need a deal at all costs. Every single one of them, to one degree or another, has been mobilized on behalf of this anti-irrational policy of yes, agreeing to a deal for the hostages at all costs. And this is to advance a strategic goal that the only one that they really care about, which is overthrowing the government and bringing in a left-wing government. So that, this is all, with the left, I think you find it in America as well.
Yeah, we do.
Which is that the left doesn't have a national interest, it only has political interests.
Yeah.
And so it makes it very difficult to have a discourse in war or in peaceful times that's rational.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're seeing now. So, luckily we finally have our non-leftist media in Israel, so that public opinion and so the people who don't watch those kinds of media or don't listen to those radio and stuff, and they're very upset about it.
Sure.
Because it's not even so much upset. See, the thing is, it's very terrifying because we're in a war for our national survival. We saw what the end looks like on October 7th, and we don't want to get anywhere near that again. And in order to prevent that from ever happening again, we have to win.
Yeah.
And so, for people who are aware of the real implications of this war and just how critical it is for Israel to win it, the deal is frightening. It's not. It's less. It's even less. Case it doesn't. It's not so infuriating so much as it's frightening because we understand what's at stake here, and we can't afford not to win this war. It's not just not to lose. What we saw on October 7th is that this is a zero-sum game. It's either them or us.
Yes, good
so
point.
So we can't not just, you can't fight to a draw with Hamas. You truly do have to have absolute victory.
Yeah, and so the left then, did they flip the narrative and make it about the hostage only and not about winning the war against people that want to kill us? They're real good, I guess, at rewriting history and rewriting the narrative. Okay, so you're right. This is about Israel's national survival.
Right.
And I was talking to some other former general last night, and he was saying, look, what the West doesn't understand, if Israel doesn't deal with this, then it's coming to the West, if it's not already here in the West.
Well, you saw on New Year's Eve, it is in the West.
Right, it is. Yeah. And so, he was making the point that Israel's at the front line, and the West doesn't seem to understand this. So help us understand, for those listening in the West, what Israel's dealing with. Because a lot of people think kind of a leftist mentality that we can sit down with Hamas, have a cup of tea, and negotiate a deal, and we can bargain them with land, money, and they'll leave us alone. And it seems to me, and I think you've said this, the West tries to impose its Western thought on jihadis. Help us understand the mentality that Israel faces.
It's not just Israel. I mean, we saw it in the West. We see it in the West almost every day, whether it's the rape gangs that are finally getting coverage in London, or whether it's 9/11 or the terror attack in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, or any of the massive amounts of terrorism that you see throughout Europe and in Australia and other places. So what we're facing and what we've been facing for decades. I mean, Al-Qaeda, for instance, declared war on the United States in 1996, and the Iranian regime declared war on the United States in 1979.
Okay.
When they declare war, what is the war that they declare? They declare holy war. They declare jihad. And from their perspective, jihad is a war for total supremacy of Islam. And the Islam that they preach is an Islam that has no place for Christianity, has no place for Judaism, unless both religions and their adherents are completely subjugated and treated worse than livestock in many cases. And so you're talking about a worldview of global domination that is adhered to by tens of millions of people. And for them, and including in places like, the Qatari regime is the chief propagator of this.
I want to talk about them.
And the Turkish regime under Erdogan, they view themselves as the leaders of this Islamic global empire by rebuilding the lost, the fallen Ottoman Empire of yore. And so they, we'd like to believe, I went to graduate school at Harvard, not such a great place anymore, but back in the day when I was there, we used to have these conflict resolution seminars where we would learn different negotiations tactics. And it was all based on this Harvard professor's book called Getting to Yes, that there was a deal to be had, that you have to look for common ground. And that's a very Western way of looking at negotiations. Like, oh, well, you were sitting down, and it'll be like the College of Cardinals choosing a pope, and until the white smoke comes out, we'll get to that decision, and it'll be for the mutual benefit of everybody. It's a real estate issue. They want this land, we want this land. Let's cut it in the middle, and it'll all be fine.
Right.
But from the perspective of jihadists, whether it's Hamas or Al Qaeda or ISIS or any of the other ones, Hizbullah Tahrir, the one Shams that just took over Syria, or the Iranian regime and all of their attendant jihadist organizations like Hezbollah, they don't view real estate as an issue. They don't care what Israel's borders are. Israel cannot exist. They don't care what American foreign policy is. If America tries to appease them, then that's because America is weak and they should just push harder, because then America will collapse. If America defends itself, then they might be deterred, or they might just lay low until you get a different policy in the White House. But whatever it is, they're determined to move forward, and they're always moving forward because they know precisely what their goal is, and they will always work to reach it, and they'll lie. They're allowed to under Islam. They're allowed to lie to non-believers. Taqiyya. It's a doctrine. And it's always, you're allowed to do everything in order to achieve global domination in the name of militant Islam. And they do. And so people like to believe, like in London, in England, that it's a problem because we're cultural imperialists, we British, and we shouldn't be mean to people who come from places like Pakistan with a different worldview. And the idea that they can groom little girls the way that they do to rape them, that's their way and we oughtn't judge them. But that's the whole point, that if you don't judge them, then this is what you're doing to your daughters. And you can't apologize your way out of a war, because the people who are trying to dominate your societies, whether from within or from without, they don't accept your right to exist as you define yourselves. They don't agree that you're free to be you. You're not. You're free to be them, or you're free to be subservient to them, but you are not free to just live in freedom, live and let live. There's no concept of that in Islam, or at least not in the Islam as practiced by the likes of militant jihadists who have been attacking the United States again, and not just Israel. United States, at least since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and Israel is the front line in this war because we're Jews. I mean, the thing that people have to understand about this is the way that these jihadists use anti-Jewish bigotry as a means to soften the West up. Because if everybody agrees that Israel is a special case, that there's something distinctly bad about Israel, and that terrorism against Israelis or against Jews worldwide is a separate category of terrorism, and that you can understand it because it's just Jews, it's not Christians, it's not the rest of the world, then you're taking down your defenses, then you're giving a place in your own societies to this kind of Islamic imperialism that's going to come and bite you, because they know lots of people don't like Jews, or lots of people think that Jews are different, that Jews are separate. And it's if Israel is allowed to be seen as a separate category, then they get us, and then they're in a much better position to get you.
Yeah.
Because you've already let all of these Trojan horses into your societies,
Right.
thinking it was just the Jews that they were after.
Yeah, no, we totally understand. We as Christians, we get it that they're coming, what do they say, to the Saturday people, then the Sunday people. They've said that mantra. And I think a lot of even Christians are unaware of that as well in the West. So let me ask you this. So some of these people, Blinken and these degenerates, I call them, I'll say that, and Biden, all of them. So we're not dealing with dumb people. Don't they understand the jihadi mindset, or is it just something else going on behind the scenes? Because you mentioned Qatar, and I'm very suspicious of Qatar because they fund a lot of our universities and spread their Wahhabism. Is there something going on in the back room? They're making deals with Qatar. Qatar inserted itself into negotiations with Hamas. Who are they? Right. What is going on with Qatar?
So Qatar is let me just put the money issue on the table so that we understand it at the outset. Qatar, I don't know what their population is, but it's quite small.
Okay.
And they have one of the largest deposits of natural gas and of oil in the world.
Okay.
So if you don't have a lot of people and you have a lot of liquid gold and natural gas, then basically your land is just a printing press for cash, because you have almost no expenses, because you don't have a population to worry about.
Sure.
And you make billions of dollars every day simply by turning on your pump. So you don't need any qualified, you don't need any special skills if that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
It's kind of like owning one big casino, right? That's a printing press.
Yeah.
So this is a printing press for cash. And so they have a lot of money. And the other thing that they have is ideology. The Qataris, beginning around in the 1960s, there was an Egyptian cleric who was thrown out of Egypt by the president then, Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the fount of radical Islam, of jihad.
Sure.
His name was Sheikh Qardawi. And Sheikh Qardawi moved from Egypt, where he was expelled, I think in 62 or something like that, to Qatar, which was just a backwater. And it was just like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or any of the other ones. There was nothing special about Qatar. And he developed a relationship with a ruling clan, the Al Thani clan, where he essentially converted them to radical Islam. And they began... in 1996, they founded the satellite television station Al Jazeera, and that became the epicenter, the chief propagator of jihad throughout the world.
Oh, wow.
It's the in-house network of Al Qaeda, of Hamas, of ISIS. And the Qatari government is a state sponsor of all of these. That's why it wasn't surprising when the United States removed its forces, when President Biden removed U.S. forces from Afghanistan, it was all negotiated with the Taliban and the Taliban's headquarters outside of Afghanistan in Doha, in the capital of Qatar, because the Taliban operate openly in Qatar. On October 7th, you had the heads of Hamas openly celebrating the one-day genocide from their five-star hotel suites in Doha.
Really?
So, that Qatar is ISIS, Qatar is Al Qaeda, Qatar is the Taliban, Qatar is Hamas. So Qatar is able to house all of these terrorist groups, sponsor them, finance them, and they're also able to to insert themselves in Western societies. So, like you said, there are a lot of universities that receive millions of dollars from Qatar. Yale, for instance. There was just a story, I covered it when I was working for the Jerusalem Post many years ago. A friend of mine, Charles Small, was appointed by Yale's president to open up a center for the study of contemporary anti-Semitism. I think it was around 2010, I can't remember anymore. And so, what is contemporary anti-Semitism? Islamic anti-Semitism by and large.
Yeah.
And so what happened was they had a very successful conference, and then suddenly, with no prior warning, the center was shut down. And the next year, and Charles was fired and everything like that. And then they opened up a new center for the study of anti-Semitism, but it was only up to and including the Holocaust, meaning European anti-Semitism, no study of Islamic anti-Semitism.
Interesting.
And at around the same time, Qatar gave a multi-million dollar
Oh, yeah.
donation to Yale.
There you go.
You can see in real time
Yeah.
the way that they had a center that was very important.
Yeah.
It was doing groundbreaking work, and it was shut down. The next year, they have a center that does no groundbreaking work, and it introduces no new knowledge to academia, and you get this massive donation from Qatar. The anti-Semitic violence that that was so prominent in all the U.S. college campuses after October 7th, so it was carried out by organizations that are also aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood, which is centered in Qatar. So whether
There you go.
it's Students for Justice in Palestine, American Muslims for Palestine, or CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations. So you had all of these groups that were fomenting a lot of the violence against Jews on campuses, and they're all aligned ideologically, and if you just dig, I'm sure you'll find as well financially with Qatar.
Yeah.
But Qatar, so they give a lot of money to universities. They're very involved in American business.
Sure.
They insinuate themselves with all the major businesses in the United States through massive investment in various businesses of people who are keynotes in the power complex of the United States in order to then give people interest in the maintenance of the Qatari regime. So they use both charitable contributions and business enterprises in the United States and throughout the West. They also just pure bribe people. They had
Oh, wow.
a European parliamentarian was, I think she was indicted for accepting bribes because they had video of her accepting millions of dollars in cash from
Whoa.
Qatari officials. And, it just, and then these piles of cash were found in your parliamentary offices or your home. I can't remember the exact details. So they do bribery. They give financial inducements through investments in American businesses and through contributions to American universities and other think tanks. The Brookings Institute has a Doha office.
Oh, my
You have
goodness.
Carnegie Mellon has a campus in Doha. Cornell Medical School has a campus in Doha. Texas A&M, I think they're just
Yeah.
closing theirs. They have had for many years a campus in Doha. So you're talking about a huge investment in American universities. And then you see, when you look at the curriculum, and President Trump has talked about how they're teaching Americans to hate their country.
Yeah.
And they're certainly teaching Americans to hate Jews. And you have to see the money as a major tool in advancing this goal. So they're playing this dual game, and they're playing it very, very successfully.
Yeah. So basically, people are turning a blind eye. Either they're bribed, there's charitable contributions, or they're doing business deals with Qatar. So they just turned a blind eye to them. That's scary. That's scary, because that undermines the whole foundation of not only Israel, but the Western society, if that's going on behind the scenes. I hope someone can shine light on that to Trump. Man. Okay, so you mentioned Erdogan in Turkey, and we saw, Assad get out of there now, and we got a guy that said, quote, we're going to be a more inclusive jihadi.
Well, there you go.
So he's using woke terms with jihadism, and this Jelani, I think his name is, or something like that. Is this guy's ISIS?
Yeah.
So we replace Bashar Assad with an ISIS guy.
Right. Iran with Qatar, essentially.
Yeah. And so what strategically is Israel thinking about with that region in Syria now?
So first of all, I think it's important to understand that Julani and the HTS, the Khirbet al-Shams, the ISIS group that just took over Syria, they're sponsored by Turkey. They're a Turkish group. They were protected by Turkish President Recep Erdogan. throughout the years of the reign of Bashar Assad. They were active in the civil war in Syria, sponsored by Turkey. And so their reign in Syria, their jihad that they're carrying out now, where they're just murdering people in the streets who are aligned with the previous regime, they're Turkish. They're an arm of the Turkish regime. And Turkey, of course, is a NATO ally. It has a very important nuclear base at Incirlik in Syria, in Turkey, but Recep Erdogan, he was elected for the first time in 2002 as prime minister, and the first thing that he did, and I think Americans forget this, he was elected. He formed his government in December of 2002, and then at the beginning of 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. And initially, the plan of the Pentagon was that the 3rd Infantry Division and the Marines would come into Iraq. I was there. I was an embedded reporter with the 3rd Infantry Division, so I remember this very, very clearly. You know, it's like, this is my memory, not just history.
Right.
So the 3rd Infantry Division entered Iraq from Kuwait in the southeast, and they moved across Iraq up to Baghdad. But the plan initially of the Pentagon was that the 4th Infantry Division, which was in Turkey, was going to invade Iraq from the north through Kurdistan and go down to Tikrit, which was Saddam Hussein's hometown. And so the idea was that you would have this north to south motion, with the north being covered by the 4th Infantry and the south being covered by the 3rd, and they were going to join up in Baghdad. And the first thing that Erdogan did when he came into power was he barred the United States from operating against Iraq from Turkish territory. So that screwed up the entire American plan. And while the 4th Infantry Division was sailing, essentially, to around Basra, where they entered into Iraq in the end, the insurrection against the United States, first led by Ba'athist and then by Iran through Al-Qaeda and Sunni militia, Shiite militia, they were able to organize their forces so that if Turkey hadn't intervened under Erdogan in his first weeks in power, then the Iraq war itself would have looked far different.
Wow.
So, this was his first act as the leader of Turkey, and since then it's just gone from bad to worse, because the way that he conceives his life is that the Ottoman Empire was a caliphate. It was an Islamic caliphate. It was an Islamic empire that ruled most of the Middle East for about 400 years. Yeah. And it collapsed during World War II. In 1917, it collapsed. And that was when the Muslim Brotherhood was formed in response to the fall of the caliphate, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So Erdogan sees himself as the real caliph, as a real Islamic as imperial power emperor, and he wants to do it through a reconstituted Ottoman Empire. He says it openly.
Wow.
And so they are neo-Ottoman imperialists. He sees himself as the head of Islam and the head of the new Ottoman Empire, and now they're projecting their forces through Syria, and I would assume that Jordan is next on the list of places that they want to go. Yeah. And he's declared war several times against Israel since the fall of Assad. So that's a new complex, and they're also operating in conjunction with Egypt. So the whole game is shifting, but we still have to take care of Iran, which is on the cusp of nuclear weapons, and we have to take care of Hamas and finish what we started so that we can deal with what's now rising in front of our faces. And it's a very complicated situation. But all of these people, like the million Syrians that entered Europe and destabilized the whole country and led to countless terrorist attacks in Europe, they all entered Europe through Turkey.
Oh,
it was
there you go.
Erdogan that pushed these million refugees, many of them are jihadists from Afghanistan, from Syria, into places like Germany, France, etc., so that he's the one that's enabling jihad in Europe. And, Qatar is paying for a lot of this. Wow. And so it's like Qatar is the banker and Turkey is the emperor, and they're working in conjunction to advance the cause of jihad in the West, and first and foremost against Israel. And we have to recognize that it's very complicated. And while I'm talking to you, I'm thinking to myself, your audience has probably got the eyes glazed over going, what is this lady talking about?
No,
This is a lot of stuff.
It's good that we're tracking because we talk about this. We talk about it, and that's why we want to talk about you, get your insight, because you have insight that's tremendous. And so you have Qatar banking the thing, Erdogan trying to be the king. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then how does that factor in with Iran? What are they vying for power too? And it's just another regime that wants to control the Middle East?
So Turkey's making its move now because it sees that Israel has so degraded the Iranian axis. Because on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas invaded Israel, Iran had an empire that stretched from Iran through Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, parts of Judea and Samaria, Yemen, the Houthi regime, and so much of that is destroyed now. Hezbollah no longer has the capacity. I don't know, it may gain it, but right now, because of what Israel did in Lebanon, Hezbollah is not in a position to invade Israel.
Okay.
On October 7th, 2023, it was poised to invade Israel and conquer large swaths of the Galilee. But because of the actions of the IDF, they no longer threaten Israel with invasion.
Okay.
So that's a big deal. Hamas,
yeah,
even as we watch, mouth agape and frightened about the implications of the ceasefire, Hamas is not the same military organization that invaded Israel on October 7th. They're likely, Israel is not going to allow them to assert power in Gaza. Israel is committed to annihilating them, and we will do it.
Okay.
And now we have a friendly American administration, which, unlike its predecessor, agrees with Israel's war aims. The only war aim that the Biden administration shared with Israel was releasing the hostages. They did not accept Israel's war aim of annihilating Hamas or preventing Gaza from posing a threat to Israel in the future. And they worked very, very openly in many ways to undermine the accomplishment of those goals. So now they're gone. We have President Trump and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, et cetera, who do share Israel's position. And so I think despite the cost, the massive cost of the hostage deal that we're implementing now, we remain positioned to achieve our goals. And then there's the issue of Iran. So Iran is much less powerful today than it was on October 7th. And what remains to be done is to destroy their nuclear installation so that they don't cross the nuclear threshold, because if they do, you're going to be facing another North Korea, but a much more powerful one politically, ideologically. So I think that, God willing, is going to happen. And then, we'll have to see how long the regime can survive when it's no longer got its terrorist, what they called a ring of fire around the Israelis. And they no longer have the hope of becoming a nuclear armed state for the foreseeable future. And you have a population that's restive, and 80% of whom want to oust the regime from power. So I think Iran is still looking down the barrel of the annihilation gun. We hope that it goes off so that this evil regime is annihilated. But again, the problem with radical Islam is that you get it in one place, you get it in another place. It's like communism. You have to actually fight it both ideologically and militarily in order to win. And whereas with communism, the West recognized the threat and fought it on all those levels. You could argue how successful it was in the end, but with the wokeism coming, and cultural Marxism in the West, all the same, the West recognized the ideological aspect of the threat of communism. And they fought it on those terms. The Americans and the Europeans, and to a very large degree the Israelis as well, have shied away from recognizing the nature of radical Islam and the ideological threat that it poses, because it's so dangerous, it's so overwhelming, and it's religion. So people are also, it's like a third rail issue to say that there's a problem with a religious faith when one of the basic bedrocks of our lives as people with democratic ideals and values is to accept the religious character of the war. And so a lot of the denial is also because it makes us uncomfortable as there's the term is liberal Democrat. You could, but however you want to phrase it is people who believe in basic freedoms and civil rights. One of them being freedom of religion. So the idea that you have a problem with a specific creed that's religious is very uncomfortable.
Yes, and I think it makes a lot of the West not go forward and really explain what Islam is, because Islam really, in my opinion, I've heard Robert Spencer say this and other guys that have studied Islam, and they're saying, look, this is a political movement wrapped in the veneer of a religion, because its aspirations is to put out on people Sharia law, dimitude to everybody under them. And wait a second, that doesn't sound like a religion. That sounds like communism. That sounds like fascism. It sounds like some type of political ideology. I don't understand, if we're going to have to deal with this, why people just can't face up for what this thing is.
I think it's also because you have a lot of people in the West, increasingly, who don't believe in God, and who don't have a religion. So first of all, if it's something that you don't value, it's hard for you to understand why other people would. And second of all, people feel very uncomfortable talking about religion when they don't really know anything about it.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about their own religion. If you're a secular Jew, your knowledge of Judaism, Jewish history, and Jewish civilization is very small.
Yeah.
And superficial. Same thing if you're a non-believing person of the Christian faith. That you were born Christian, but you don't go to church. You don't know anything about Christianity. You don't value your religion, and you don't know anything about it.
Right.
So when you're in that kind of position where you don't even know what it is that people are dealing with, it's also, you're very uncomfortable. People like, I always, there's the old adage, I think, of the University of Chicago economics department, which was, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, if you have a worldview that's liberal, democratic, Western, then you try to put everything into the context that you can understand. And if things don't fit into that context, you're not necessarily willing to accept the information. And that, when you talk about Tony Blinken, Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan, I think that there's a lot of that going on as well. These people they don't have real faith. They don't have a real understanding of what people of faith are about. And as a result, they don't feel comfortable judging radical Islam. And I think it's important to put in, Islamism or jihadist Islam, because, you can interpret a creed or a faith in many ways. And there are many Muslims in this world who read the Quran and are able to interpret it in a way that allows them to live and peacefully coexist with other faiths very easily, and not seek the destruction of other faiths or other people because they don't have their faith. But the specific type of Islam, which is very popular, which is the creed of regimes like Turkey, like Qatar, like Iran, is something that you do have to recognize for what it is, and to contend with it on its own, by the way that it defines itself, not by the way that you would like to define it yourself.
Yeah, right. And I think you're making a good point. And a lot of our audience, Christians, obviously. The interesting thing, Caroline, is when we look at our Antichrist in the New Testament, it matches their Mahdi.
Their Mahdi?
Their
Messiah?
Their Messiah. Their Messiah does things that our New Testament says the Antichrist will do. And so we look at, as a Christian, saying, what's going on over there? And so you're absolutely right. And then you could just come down to the fundamentals of believing in the Word of God and right and wrong. And you see, Joshua going into the land and God saying, yeah, that group right there, you have to drive them out. I need them all wiped out. And I'm not advocating murdering or anything like that, but I now understand from the Old Testament why God was telling Joshua, yeah, that group right there, yeah.
The Amalekites.
The Amalekites.
Right, I was going to write a book on the Amalek at the beginning of the war, but I got overcome by my inbox, and I still believe I'm going to get to it. But I think that what we saw really did remind us of what God not only told Joshua, he told Moses, he told King Saul, he told all of us that we have to annihilate Amalek, because Amalek, the basic concept of Amalek, or the Amalekites in English, is that they did two things. One is that they went after the weakest of the Israelites of Egypt, and they did that. They were the ones, the stragglers, the ones that were tired, the women, the children, etc., just like they did on October 7th. And second of all, they also pose a spiritual threat to the Jewish people, because they instill them with doubts about about God, about their relationship with God, and the supremacy of God. And so it's both a spiritual effort to wipe out the Jewish people, and it's a physical threat to the Jewish people. And that's why, because of the duality of the threat of the Amalekites, God insisted that whereas the Egyptians just had to be punished, but the punishment ended the minute that the Jews were allowed to go, or we got away, right?
Right.
The Amalekites is an ongoing struggle, because because they want to crush. Can you imagine this people? They just were subjected to the greatest miracle in human history, the parting of the Red Sea, the 10 plagues against the greatest regime, the greatest empire in the world. Pharaoh was seen to be God, right? He believed himself to be God.
Right.
And he brought low, and his whole army destroyed when the sea went back and swallowed them up. And everybody saw it. And yet, right after this happened, the Amalekites attacked the Jews, because they were trying to attack God. And so how do they, after such an extraordinary miracle happens, how do they make people question the supremacy of the Lord? Is by going after his people. They can't go after God, so they go after
they attack his people. Yep.
And so that's the basic insight, that they will never stop, because it's not the Israelites so much that they're going after from a spiritual perspective. It's God. It's the God of Israel they're going after.
That's right.
That's why they specifically, that's why the Jews are called on specifically to go after them, to destroy them in the Bible. And I think that we saw a glimpse of the modern day version of the Amalekites on October 7th.
Absolutely. And I know you're a political analyst, but as a pastor, I can't help but see the spiritual war that's happening. That the Jews are being attacked because they represent God, they're God's people, and the Amalekites or whoever, they can't attack God, so they attack his apple of his eye.
Right.
So at the end of the day, I'm reminded of that story, and you know it well, with King Saul, and he didn't finish the job. Right. And Samuel the prophet says, hey, what's this guy doing alive here? I told you to wipe them out. I hope and pray, and I'm sure you do, that Israel doesn't repeat Saul's mistake, that they finish the job and get to that place where they're protected and they don't have these lingering people that just kind of want to take revenge and wipe them out from being a people. And the good news is, Israel one day would be the head of the nations and not the tail. And we don't know how far that is off, but the one thing I do know is God will preserve his people, and God will make sure that they're sustained. You are, and the Jewish people are a testimony of God's faithfulness, that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And every time we're here, Caroline, and you represent this, every time I see you, on YouTube, it's a testimony of God. That's the one true God. And they will not be destroyed.
Well, I agree with you. I'll just say that sometimes you can understand Saul, in the sense that it's very hard to be placed in that position all the time.
Sure.
And I think over the past 15 months, our soldiers have shown a level of heroism that is unbelievable. It's breathtaking. It's shocking in a way. I mean, who knew that we were raising this generation? But we have, by the grace of God. And I think that the most important thing for us to remember is that we have to be worthy of them, because all of them were as brave as Samuel.
Yeah.
And as a result, we owe it to them.
Amen.
To carry on what they started. And so I think, in that respect, it's a daunting task before us. I think it's important that we have people like you and also people like President Trump, who recognizes the difference between good and evil. And I think that, it's even, Moses had to, when the Israelites were fighting the Amalekites in the Sinai, he had to have Joshua and Caleb holding up his arm.
That's right.
And so I think it's important now that President Trump has come in and he's ended the arms embargo against Israel.
Which is great.
And that's a big support. And he's ended the political warfare in the UN and other places against Israel, and that's very important. So I think that with God's help and with the support of our friends, I think, certainly our boys are equal to the task. And I think, God willing, that the Jewish people will do it as well.
You will prevail.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I know you're busy, but we appreciate our audience, appreciate you. We're praying for you guys. We're supporting. And where can they find you? If they don't know who you are, I can't believe they wouldn't know, but where can they find you, Caroline?
I haven't had a time to update my personal website for a few months. Hopefully I'll get to it.
Okay.
It's at CarolineGlick.com.
Okay.
My name is spelled Caroline.
Yeah.
And they can also read my stuff at jns.org.
Yeah, which is tremendous.
Which is, and the YouTube channel, JNS TV, and that's where all of my stuff is found, and so they can
Fantastic.
find me there. So.
You guys want the best insight? You got to go to her. She's the best, no doubt about it. Thank you so much.
You're not so bad yourself. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. God bless you. We'll see you guys next time.